Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. I'm your host, Henna Zaberi, and you're watching us on Muslim Network TV, America's only Muslim-focused TV channel. You can watch us 24/7 on Galaxy 19 satellite, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, and various social media websites. After a mob of Trump supporters, some of them who were armed, besieged and then ransacked the Capitol a few weeks ago, many contrasted the response of the law enforcement to that of mostly white rioters with the brutal police crackdown on Black Lives Matter protests. And others observed that if any time this would have been a Muslim or Muslims have even contemplated such an act, they would have been branded as terrorists. And it would have been, and many of the people who were commenting as such on social media websites, you can't blame them. You know, it was a very sharp contrast, and there were several memes floating around on, our WhatsApp groups. But let's take a deeper look at this. Do Black people and Black Muslims, generally Muslims in the United States, we all know that we're over-policed. We've heard it from our communities. People, when they come on the show, several people have spoken about their personal experiences. And most of this policing is done under the guise of public safety. So today I wanted to talk to somebody who's really an expert on this topic, as he's fought many cases across the country, working for Council of American-Islamic Relations, CARE, the Muslim community's largest civil rights organization. Gadeir Abbas is the attorney for CARE. He's spearheaded major lawsuits across the country involving constitutional issues and of particular concern to the American Muslim community, including the successful challenge to Oklahoma State's Question 755, a voter-approved referendum that would bar references to Islamic religious traditions in Oklahoma courts. He's also litigated on behalf of American Muslims surveilled by GPS tracking without warrants, based on the federal government's terrorist watch list, and prevented, when our communities have been prevented from building schools or mosques by discriminatory zoning laws. And we've discussed many of those topics here on the show. So I am so honored to welcome Gadeir on the show and have a robust conversation about the aftermath of what happened on Capitol Hill, domestic terrorism, and what are the implications for Black and Brown communities. Thank you so much, Gadeir.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for having me.
So, what did you see? What were your thoughts watching what unfolded on January 6th at the Capitol?
Well, I couldn't help but feel baffled that the billions and billions of dollars that we spend on police, on law enforcement, on the military, couldn't stop a few thousand people upset at Joe Biden's election to the presidency from storming the Capitol building during the Senate's ratification of the Electoral College results. And, it was, like you said, the contrast from, the Black Lives Matter protests and uprisings that happened in the summer all across the country, where you'd regularly see the police outnumber the protesters. And here, the nation's Capitol building at a particularly vulnerable point, doing something absolutely critical to the transfer of power, just, calling it in and letting, a bunch of hooligans ransacked the Capitol building in front of everybody's eyes, and so, that was what I took away from the day's events.
Definitely. Yes, it was a shock. I mean, both of us have been at the Capitol. There's security. There's just seeing the difference in how it was flabbergasting. I was flabbergasted because I cannot imagine for a minute that if this had been a crowd of dreamers, or if it had been a crowd of any other constituency, that they would have been treated in the same manner, especially something so well planned where they had T-shirts and nooses hanging outside. It was just something out of the Twilight Zone, but it wasn't. It was real, and these were also citizens of our country who felt this way and felt the privilege of entering our Capitol building and being able to brandish, I remember so many protests where you were not allowed to even bring in a stick to hold up your poster. Your posters had to be in your hands. So all those rules seem to have been thrown out of the window. But I wanted to talk about the implications of this insurrection and how it shines a light not only on the way the police treat different groups of people, but also on the way they label threats. How is this affecting the way people view the right to assemble?
Well, I think that it was a very traumatic episode for a lot of people, a symbol of our country, of our history, of our collective experience, attacked. And I think that everybody felt the trauma of that. But in the wake of that trauma, I think that the reaction has been that, we really can take a technological approach to dissuading these folks from assembling, from organizing. And that's why, in the aftermath of lawlessness at the Capitol building, you have, Silicon Valley companies uniting to, close Parler down, an entire social media platform just, burned to the ground, in a couple days in reaction. And it turned out that most of the organizing that took place in advance of January 6th was done in plain view and on Facebook, not on Parler or elsewhere. It was done on Facebook. And so I think that you see a lot of folks taking advantage of the trauma to legitimize their own bad behavior. In the wake of January 6th, calls to, Senator Chuck Schumer, now Majority Leader Schumer, is, calling on people to, all these people to be placed on a watch list. Well, you know what? If they were on a watch list, it wouldn't have stopped them from ransacking the Capitol building in the first place. And that's Chuck Schumer's response to every bad thing that happens ever is, Osama bin Laden is raided and he's killed. And they mention railroads and trains in some documents that get collected. Chuck Schumer wants a no-ride list. Forget about the no-fly list. Let's create a list of people that aren't allowed to board trains. And, I think that this huge security apparatus, just days before, just around January 6th, almost $750 billion, $750 billion gets approved for the military. Tens of billions of dollars, spent on the FBI and other, domestic law enforcement entities. And out of all of that, we can't even stop a bunch of idiots, from breaking into the Capitol building and shutting down an essential function of government. It was the final step, the final ceremonial step to, label Joe Biden as the winner of the election. And we can't even do that. And so the answer is not additional police power, additional police dollars. it's there's like a shortcoming that doesn't have to do with the resources that are allocated for those kinds of things.
Definitely. And you've spoken before about terrorist watch lists and brought the suit arguing the lack of constitutionality of the list itself. And we saw that very viral video of that young white man who was not allowed to board the plane, and how this was ruining his life. And you've seen many Muslim lives, Arab lives, being ruined by being placed on these terror watch lists. Are people starting to see it differently now, that a different demographic of people, like, do you think the mainstream America is taking a look at this and saying, hey, even though this was happening to this particular community, now that it's happening to this, the majority, representatives of the majority, this is not acceptable, and this should not be occurring?
I've heard that thought expressed, a lot, that, now that, white Trump supporters may find themselves on watch lists, that's going to do more than anything else to delegitimize the watch list. But, although George W. Bush is the president that created the watch list, it was a minor program of limited scope, during the Bush years. It really wasn't until after Obama became president, and after the underwear bomber tried to detonate a device on Christmas Day over Detroit, I think this was in 2009, that the watch list exploded. And so I think that, here the watch list presents liberals the idea that, we can make use of this, counterterrorism tool against people that we're more afraid of. And so I think rather than, I think that we're getting so far away from 9/11, alhamdulillah, terrorism is extremely rare. And it's been getting more rare in recent years. And, we're 20 years past 9/11. And I think that this latest attempt to find a new target for the watch list is an attempt by, security state to re-entrench themselves, give themselves a new mission to legitimize what has been really a failed enterprise. For 20 years, we've been putting people on watch lists, and every time there's a terrorism incident, every time there's an act of violence, the question gets asked, was this person on the watch list?
Watch list.
And every single time, the answer is no. The answer is that this person committed the act of terrorism, Pulse nightclub shooter, the Times Square bomber, Najib al-Azazi in Colorado, whoever it was that was trying to commit an act of violence or wasn't on the watch list when they did so. And so my fear is that January 6th, instead of shaking us from this 20-year slumber of, 9/11 induced, security state hysteria, will just compel us to find a new mission for what has been for 2 decades now a failed project.
This is, and when you say this, let's just to remind our viewers, some of them who are in rural America, who might not know what the Muslim community has gone through because of these watch lists. Could you tell us how many Muslims have been placed on these watch lists? How big are these watch lists, and what kind of havoc have they created in people's lives?
Yeah. So in 2003, and after the 9/11 Commission, which was a congressional commission that looked into what happened on 9/11, any security failures that occurred, and proposed a set of recommendations. One of the recommendations they proposed is additional information sharing between agencies. And so George W. Bush issued an executive order, HSPD 6, to create a single federal government-wide watch list of what came to be known as and labeled as, people that are known or suspected terrorists. And so, for a few years, it was really ad hoc and informal, so informal, in fact, that in the mid 2000s, I think 2006, 2007, 60 Minutes got an entire copy of the whole watch list, and it had a couple 100,000 names on it. And some of the names were Nelson Mandela, Ted Kennedy, Evo Morales, world leaders, activists in other countries. Nelson Mandela was on the watch list because, he was associated with the ANC, which the government apparently considered, a terrorist organization. And, and then there was some embarrassment from the federal government in the wake of that, 60 Minutes airing, some parts of the entire watch list. And so you saw it shrink in size. But Obama became president, and then the response to the underwear bomber was, we need to explode the size of the watch list. And so now, 20 years later, there's about 1.2 million individuals on the watch list. The watch list is shared with more than 60 foreign countries, including, human rights abusers like Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, China. All these countries are getting the watch list. Imagine being a Uyghur Muslim American and finding yourself, on the watch list and knowing that China is getting a copy. More than 500 private entities, you're talking for-profit, public, corporations have access to the watch list.
And the children on this.
I'm sorry?
And the children on this watch list as well.
There are children on the watch list. There's people who, when they go through screening at the airport, they'll get pulled aside, and their children's diapers will be patted down, individually, the one they're wearing. And so it's this like technological approach to a security issue of that doesn't pose a great risk to Americans. Thankfully, terrorism is very rare. And what we have to show for 20 years of watch listing is not a single terrorism incident has been stopped. And I think it obfuscates what really is the most important security reform after 9/11 is also the simplest. It's locks on cabin doors, on cockpit doors. That locks on cockpit doors probably would have stopped 9/11 from happening. After 9/11, they put those locks in, but there's a bit of theater that goes along with governing. And I think that unfortunately, some people feel better when a minority loses rights. And that's been the Muslim community now, but it looks like it might change
in the future. So Ramzi Qasim, also with Sunni CUNY, writes that vesting more money and power in law enforcement could only exacerbate the problem of prejudice in policing. It would be the opposite of what millions of Americans called for this year when they took to the streets nationwide, demanding that police be defunded. And it would expand an already sprawling national security apparatus that must instead be diminished. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's exactly right. The underwear bomber is a great example. The underwear bomber's father begged the federal government to put his child on the no-fly list, warned the federal government about his concerns about that his child might do something violent against the government. But because the FBI has taken this bulk indiscriminate approach to policing, we're going to surveil the Muslim community. We're going to install a network of 15,000 informants across the country, create a watch list of more than 1 million people. It's really impossible for the FBI to act in response to good information that it receives. And, that's what we see time and time again. Pulse nightclub shooter. There were, that guy was, in the FBI's attention prior to his massacre. The Chelsea bomber in New Jersey, the father reported the son to the FBI years before the bombing. And so I think that if law enforcement has reason to believe that someone's committing a crime, they should investigate it. Mm-hmm. And if they find evidence of criminal wrongdoing, they should prosecute it, which is what they do. But this idea that we're going to hoover up and be omnipotent and just surveil everybody all the time has been a fool's errand, and more money, more manpower is not going to fix it.
So, Republican Representative Ruben Callego, in an interview, so he related what he saw as it was playing out in the Capitol to insurgencies around the world. He said that I've been in combat and scarier than what I saw, but it was still very frightening. And then he goes on to say that we know that these militias are all over the world, and we now have them in the United States, and we have the world's best intelligence systems in this country, and we need to gear them to actually tracking down and destroying all of these domestic terror networks that we have allowed to fester in these past 4 years. So and we do know that DHS has issued a terrorism advisory bulletin with a variety of reasons to suspect terror attacks, including anger over COVID-19 restrictions, the 2020 election results, and police use of force. So how do you think, keeping this in mind, how do you think that domestic terrorism is going to be the focus of DHS? How is it going? What are you seeing it play out is? So let's talk about that, and then I have a few questions more about security.
Yeah, I think that this focus on domestic terrorism is going to yield, no results other than to justify, these huge budgets that can't even stop, a couple thousand people from ransacking the Capitol building. We don't have, the United States does not have the best intelligence system in the world. We have the most expensive intelligence system. Perhaps we have the most technologically sophisticated intelligence system. But these folks, an intelligence system that can't discern that people openly planning to ransack the Capitol building might warrant, some additional police presence at the Capitol building, is not an intelligence system that's doing a good job. And I think that's been the case, time and time again, that, DHS, which is, again, a sprawling bureaucracy, covers everything from, we're going to approve an immigration application to we're going to give you, a tent if your house is, overrun by a hurricane. And everything in between, this huge, billions and billions of dollars a year bureaucracy needs to have a justification. It needs to have a reason that warrants all the billions and billions of dollars that we spend. And I think that there is a growing concern in some quarters among the threat of, white supremacy, of these militia groups, of former Trump supporters organizing and committing acts of violence, when in reality people that commit crimes should be charged with crimes and they should be sent to prison, and people who are talking about paranoid things or conspiratorial things and not doing anything about it should be left alone. And certainly, like the history of state violence against, right-wing groups or cult groups. You have the Ruby Ridge incident, David Koresh, you're talking dozens of people killed by, the Clinton administration. And, and that becomes part of right-wing folklore about, how the state needs to be countered. And so, I don't think that the answer to, our difficulties is in being more oppressive, have a greater surveillance system, or target that surveillance system against others. And I'm skeptical. I'm really skeptical that the surveillance and police system will actually be aimed at these white supremacist groups. I think that in the end, while there will be some lip service paid and some mild reports issued about white nationalist violence, that really and truly any increased surveillance, any increased police powers will inevitably be turned against the Muslim community.
Yeah. And this is something that is definitely that many times as we talk about CVE programming, and this is not a new conversation, right? When that people have said we should have CVE programs for domestic terrorists or white nationalists, and this is something that a lot of experts in the Muslim community who have seen the effects of this have said that this is a failed system. This is something that it doesn't identify extremists. It doesn't, that's whole what is that called when these are signs and then I can't remember. I'm losing the terminology right now, but this is something
the progression towards radicalization.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And we've seen that it doesn't work. It doesn't work in any sort of extremist groups. There are no signs to how someone would become an extremist in any, there's no science to it, despite very large budgets in universities studying this. So what are your thoughts on using counter-violence extreme techniques against white nationalist groups, or after this, particularly in infiltration versus infiltrating these groups and using community engagement and connection?
Yeah, if the FBI takes the approach that they've used in the Muslim community often, where they isolate some mentally ill or like marginalized person, that doesn't have a lot, that's vulnerable a lot of differently, socially, mentally, emotionally, surrounds that person, FBI agents, pumps that person full of delusions of grandeur, and then has that person, do something illegal with an FBI agent, pretending to be a white nationalist. I'm sure they'll be successful. I'm sure are many entrapment plots that the FBI could foment inside white nationalist groups, with great effect in terms of the theatrics. But the problem that we have is like a problem of alienation. There's plenty of people that look at the political landscape and don't see themselves at all, don't see their interests in either political party. And you have rising rates of diseases of despair. Suicide rates are increasing across the board, especially during the pandemic. And so I think that these white supremacist groups, these white nationalists, they're racist. Yeah, they have a terrible message, but I think they're blooming in a climate that is desolate. There's not a lot of hope for a lot of people that things are going to get better. And so I think that the nihilism of Trump, where we're just going to burn it all down, we're going to be disrespectful to everybody, all the time, and rude to entrenched, powers that be. I think that, here the answer is difficult. It's probably to have a more credible, responsive political system that takes care of people, that meets people where they are, rather than the technocratic approach. We're going to excise the problem by surveilling and criminalizing association and deplatforming certain kinds of speech. Those efforts are, I think, the only place that those efforts are going to lead is to minority groups, Black Lives Matter activists, Muslim community, dreamers being booted off of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everything else. The stage will be left, Marco Rubio and other folks that traffic in the polite bigotry that passes as acceptable political discourse in the 21st century.
Sure. Thank you so much. Our time is up, but we're so grateful for you to be here. As our audience can see, that the efforts that have been put against the Muslim community, we were the canary in the coal mine, and these again, the surveillance, the terror watch list, they haven't really been successful. So using these defunct tactics, again, on the wider community is not something that many Muslim experts are asking for at all. We don't want what has happened to our community to happen to others, because precisely of this reason, innocent people get caught up in this dragnet and lives are destroyed. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.